for the first one that's seen that film the whole way through, apart from Gavin, Abby and myself. It is going, though, at the moment we're duplicating the DVDs. There are 1,000 being produced. They're going to every local authority in the country and to every NHS trust, ambulance trust and police authority in the country as well, along with copies of the 10,000 booklets that we're printing, which are being funded by eVoice as well. So what I'd like to do, if anyone's got any questions about the film, about the process, or about as being a counsellor blogging, Jenny, Peter and Fran, I think, have volunteered to answer any questions that may get asked.
Quick question to each of you, really. You're the leading lights within each of the political groups at the County Council. Are you now taking that back to your groups to advocate and be a champion for the rest of the councillors to get online and be blogging?
I've certainly mentioned it to member councillors, but now I have the green light. I shall advertise a little bit more amongst my group. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Do I take that as an offer of some funding? So, given that's a good point. Can I just make a slightly serious point? Because one of the things I think that we did feel right at the outset, and we were obviously steered by our monitoring officer, we did feel slightly crammed. Although we are actually on a public, using a public system, not the county system, because of standard codes and so on, it is actually quite difficult. So one of the things I would like you to take on board, Daniel, if I can say, and this wider audience, is that we do need to enable politicians to actually be honest about the fact that they are politicians, they will have views, they will like to express them. One of the good bits for me about this, as I hopefully suggested in the film, it gives me an opportunity to express on behalf of my constituents what I want to say, rather than about what I ought to say, constrained by some of the constraints we do have, both within legislation and indeed in terms of finances and so on. But thank you all for the opportunity to do it.
Thank you. I'd like to back up what Peter said. It is difficult sometimes to decide what is appropriate to put on the blog and what isn't appropriate. I'm sorry you didn't see me on there. On both occasions, for one reason or another, I wasn't available to be filmed. I enjoyed the experience enormously, and I do, Daniel, pass it on to my fellow members of my group and saying this is something we ought to go down and all do as a matter of course. It is time-consuming initially. That's the only other thing, and it can be a bit off-putting. The other thing I would say, in quite a serious way, is that it's got to be part of a whole. Not just that we've already heard, it's part of the other work that we do within the constituency, and you're quite right about attending meetings and so forth. The only other thing I would say is that as part of that whole, please, 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 can we have another go at webcasting?
I've got a question about the blogging politicians speaking in the movie. Were they already very communicative politicians, or has this changed by blogging? And a second question, has their way of doing politics changed by the daily blogging?
It's not changed. What it does do is it gives you another tool in the armoury. So it's an additional way. At the moment, and I think you saw on the film, Tony probably got the most hits with a specific local issue. And I think we all felt that it's an additional way of reaching people who we would not normally meet. If we hold public meetings about an issue, you will get, frankly, the usual expected attendance, which tends to be quite low. Doing it this way, you can still do the public meetings, but it's an additional way of outreaching to those who wouldn't come to those meetings. So it's an extra. And actually, I think, as we've all said, initially there's a time investment, but once you accept the fact that it is part of what you're doing, you can actually relatively easily filter it in without it being too burdensome.
I think I agree with Peter there, and I still have some issues over the technology of uploading movies and photographs and clipping and getting the size down and that sort of thing, and trying to embed it in some text and what have you. And that's something I ought to be doing myself, but I still get sons and daughters to do instead. But it's an extra way, and the bit I feel positive about is that the younger generation are all on Facebook. They are all doing stuff online, and so as soon as they do pick up my site, and hopefully there are leaflets like this getting posted around the neighbourhood and in the schools, and so they will where it says your county councillor needs you, join the debate. Hopefully they will get online, and I'll learn about things about which I wouldn't normally learn. And it tends to be the toilets in the high school, I have to say, rather than the bad teaching or the exams or something. But at least it'll bring different issues to the county council, which is what we need.
Thank you. Very little to add to that. I agree entirely. I've not been doing much this past month, 6 weeks actually, because I found I'm busy doing other things, and it ought not to be that way. I'd like to suggest that I ought to be spending more time doing my blog and less time writing to people, quite honestly, over issues which not always are very important.
There's a funny guy called Colin McKay, who's a civil servant in Canada, who wrote a guide to social media in organisations. And he made the comment about bloggers and other people who use social media that we tend to overshare. And it's overshare in terms of they do give you too much information about themselves. But that's the type of person they are. They want to help. If they find a politician, someone who is responsible for running the country, or they're part of the country, who needs help to communicate online, you'll get it. And by using a platform such as WordPress, like our councillors did, there are millions and millions of people in this country using WordPress. And there will be people in your area who will be using it and only too willing to help. Finally, because I think we have run out of time, unless there are any pressing questions, if anyone does want a copy of the film and the booklets, just let us have a business card at the back, and I'll make sure you send one in a couple of weeks when they're all ready to go.